Dobar dan, everybody. I'm Joe Lowther. I thought my name was up there. I know a lot of you. It's great to be back among friends. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Chief of Party of the Cooperation for Growth project, and I was here from 2011 to 2016 on the Business Enabling Project, BEP, some of you know it as. And one of the things we did on that project was a survey of 1,000 businesses each year. And I'm really happy to be back here to continue that survey. And I'm going to take you through the results of the survey, and we're going to see some trends. We're going to learn what's going on in the business environment, how have the reforms impacted firms and their competitiveness. We're going to learn about access to finance for businesses, particularly micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. What are their issues there? And this year, which we're going to do something that we haven't done before, we're going to try to look at the firms that are driving growth here, the ones that are the really exciting firms out there that are going to continue to create jobs in Serbia. They've been creating jobs in Serbia, and what are their attributes so we can understand that a little bit better. The survey this year was done by Ipsos Strategic Marketing, and again conducted in over 1,000 businesses using a representative sample both in terms of size of business and geography by region. And 17% of companies have more than 20 employees. So what that implies is basically we are again matching the economy. This is an economy of mostly small businesses, which is not a bad thing. These are the kind of businesses that can drive economic growth. They are driving economic growth and employment. I'm also happy to point out that from our sample this year, there's more women ownership of firms. 24% of companies have at least 50% female ownership, which is growing. Obviously, still a way to go there. So I'm going to start the presentation by looking at the trends over the past years. Although we started the survey in 2011, most of what you'll see in terms of trends are from 2013 because of some changes in methodology that we made in 2013. So just to make sure that data is completely consistent throughout. So let's get going. Transparency and predictability. We see a really big increase in this one. This is an important indicator because businesses, this really shows how they're feeling the effectiveness of the overall government reform effort that's been going on. So this is a great thing. And also, this is an important element of the perception of risk of businesses. As this number increases, the perception, at least of these areas of risk, decreases. What does that mean? Of course, firms are more likely to invest in Serbia, whether they're domestic or foreign investors, and they probably are looking for less of a return on investment as their risk goes down. Next, the laws and regulations. These are also two good overall indicators of the reform efforts that we have up here. On the left side, we've got the improvements in the perception of the burden of law of regulations, big improvements from 2013 to 14, and again, now in this survey, 2017 to 2019, we didn't do a survey last year, so we skip a year, but had a good improvement there. Also very important and very impressive is the 74% of businesses that believe that the public administration efficiency has improved. Congratulations to the minister for that. And we'll ask them about that and how they did that. And hopefully we'll see a continued upward trend there. We'll move on to public-private dialogue. So one of the reasons that we're seeing some of these improvements, I think, is that public-private dialogue has improved, at least from the perspective of the businesses. And why is that important? Public-private dialogue is absolutely essential to develop good laws and regulations and also to implement them well. So the businesses are heard at the inception of a reform or a legislative effort, and then as it's being implemented, they help monitor it. And then there are a lot of excellent business associations in this country that do a very good job of monitoring and providing feedback to the government. So again, a big improvement now, and we hope to see more and more inclusive public-private dialogue in the years ahead. That's something that our project's working on, to try to incorporate more small businesses into the dialogue. Access to finance, another good trend. This one's interesting. Businesses feel like they have, or at least their perception is that they've got more access to finance. But we're going to see some numbers that sort of contradict that. They're actually accessing very little external finance. In fact, here we go. So you look at these numbers here. Still, over 80% of businesses over 80% of the funding for investments and capital and working capital needs is coming from businesses' own funds. Very little external finance here. You can see the banks remain around 10%. And that is not a good number, and I can compare it to some numbers from an EU study in 2014, so we can compare it to the EU market in general. They found that 37% of SMEs' finance comes from bank overdrafts or credit lines, so fairly short term, 29% from leasing, only 14% from their own internal funds, 14 compared to over 80 here, and 13% from bank loans. This means, I believe, that it's going to be extremely difficult, if things stay the same, for Serbian businesses to compete in the EU market because of the lack of leverage that they've got. They don't have the same financial leverage that the EU firms have. By the way, even the United States, which has a less bank-centric model, has much more loans for business coming from banks than Serbia has. Oops. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now, 63% of businesses report no change in the number of employees, and about 45% report no change in revenue and profit. But the number of firms that are reporting increases in each of these is about double of those reporting a decrease. For example, 17% report a decrease in total revenue in the past year. You can see that much higher, more than double, reporting an increase. So we do see there has growth at the firm level that is driving the economic growth that we're seeing overall in the economy. Sorry about the technical glitches. I don't think I'm doing anything. And as we look forward next year, and I don't have the slide for this, but just to give you the numbers, 52% of firms expect an increase in revenues and profits, and 35% expect an increase in employees. By the way, these numbers, we've been asking the same question since 2011. This is the most optimistic that the firms have ever been since we've done. So quite a bullish private sector out there, which should bode well for economic growth. Money and time, this is one that we've felt is an important indicator of the regulatory reforms, and it's improved the indicator, but as you can see, we'd like to see that right side on the blue, where they're spending less time and money. A lot more improvement there, but it's, most firms are reporting things are staying the same and not getting worse. This is one I think that we need to really think through, all of the government and all of its partners in the business community and the donors, on how we can improve this. What is actually causing the problems here? We had previously done some standard cost model work where we measure the cost of complying with different regulations, and we should probably revisit that and look at some areas that we need to focus on. Corruption, it's having an impact on less firms this year than it had in 2013. It's a pretty steady downward trend, good thing, obviously. This year we added a new possible question, or answer, I mean, corruption does not exist in public administration. 3% of firms said that, so hopefully we'll get more there, but certainly there's a good drop overall, which we're happy to see. So let's take a look at where challenges remain in the business environment, or the biggest challenges, I suppose. The gray economy is rated very high, and a lot of tax issues. Not surprising on taxes. Businesses complain about that a lot, but the gray economy is a battle that's still going on. The government does have a program for that, so that is being addressed, and with a detailed plan, I know. Also, monopolistic behavior and unfair commercial practices are up there, and court procedures continue to be a problem that needs to be addressed pretty urgently. Now, let's look at the good news. Inspections, really good to see that number there. Only 14% of companies see inspections having a negative impact. So all of the work on inspections reform has paid off, it seems, with these numbers, although we're going to look at some specific things on inspections that show where some additional work is needed. With the major effort going on with support of multiple donors, some big strides have been made in terms of inspections procedures. You can see some work to be done. It is difficult because we're talking about thousands of inspectors all over the country, and it's in the upper 30s, 36, 37 inspectorates, I'm not sure. They're better coordinated, good to see that, but they really are supposed to be using warrants and checklists. It's actually required by law in almost all cases. Not happening. That's something that we need to focus on, all of us working on inspections reform, which includes our project, by the way. Why have firms not hired employees? I think this one's important to note because of the left side and then the far right side. So great to see that the labor law and the regulations and red tape around employment are actually not a big cause of a lack of employment. And so that's good. There's not a lot of regulatory work to be done, but you look at the big side there, the big one is the lack of a market. It's actually, I think, reflective of the fact that most firms are just not really in a growth mode, but some are, and we're going to talk about that at the end of this presentation. So how do we get companies to comply with tax? We have a lot of questions on tax and other issues. I'm really only showing you, I should have mentioned, you're probably seeing about 5 or 10% of the survey results here. We have a lot. You can break it down by region, by size of business, any way that you like. So anybody that wants data on anything, please contact us. We've got it. We'll be publishing the full results with a big report soon. I think we'll get at least some of the results up today on our website, and more coming. And we're happy to come out and even talk to anybody about this. But anyway, back to tax compliance. One of the questions we ask on tax is, what will make you comply more? Well, not surprisingly, they don't want more inspections or audits or sanctions. They think the best measure would be lower taxes. But I think it's instructive to look at some of the other issues here. The key of things that we can work on, and when we're working on this with VAT right now, is simple and understandable instructions, transparency, openness, so people understand how to comply better and what they're doing right or wrong, and they're getting consistency in their in the treatment they have in tax compliance. I'll look a little bit now at some issues regarding firm competitiveness and access to finance. And some of these slides I'll hold on for a minute because they're fairly complicated with a lot of numbers on them. But in this one, I should mention, besides these numbers, which I'm not really going to go over, only about 26% of companies do any exporting at all to any place. And only 10% of products and services are exported at all. These are not very high numbers, and if you look at that 10% of that, actually more than half go to non-EU ex-Yugoslavian countries. So in other words, the ex-Yugoslavia other than Croatia and Slovenia. So not a lot of exports to wealthier and more sophisticated markets yet. Let's talk about one way to penetrate these markets in a fairly inexpensive way, and that is use of e-commerce. Certainly this can save some of the money that's probably impossible for a lot of small businesses in Serbia to spend on access to markets, how to do marketing. E-commerce can save a lot of money if you do it well, and it's spreading throughout the world, as probably all of you know, rapidly. And in the United States, where I've been living the last few years, you can buy everything, and people do. They don't even hardly go to the supermarket. Some people like to. I like to go, but you can get anything delivered very quickly. It's all done either over an app or on your computer, and that's where the world is going. Business to business, same thing. I've got a friend who sells shopping carts and racks to supermarkets, customized ones. He barely goes to see customers anymore. Even his designers don't. It's all done over the internet, and they understand that they need to move this way. But they're not there. We have a long way to go. You can see from these numbers, Serbian companies are really not doing much online business at all. There's a start. Most have a website or a web page. I guess that would include things like Facebook pages. You know, and it is expensive to set up a web shop and online payments. And here we don't have, I believe, a real aggregator like Amazon or Alibaba in this market. So you've got to do it mostly individually. And then there's issues with the law on foreign exchange. I think a lot of those have been fixed, but there's still some things to be done on that law to make the cross-border transactions easier. So businesses say they need investments. All right. And the businesses complain about a lack of financial resources, and they say that's hurting their competitiveness. We can see that on the left side here. There are some other interesting results, but I won't get into those because I'm going to talk about access to finance right now. But remember, they're not actually accessing much external finance. So part of that is things are not on offer, perhaps, or that they need, or they're not the kind of customers that banks and other financiers want. But we also see they're not applying much. In fact, 31% of companies only ask for some sort of external financing. And then you look at their request for bank financing, very little, only 8% for investment financing, 21% on more short-term products. And so we continue to have a market that's constrained by investments or lack of ability to invest. And again, we look at this number, the trend here really hasn't changed significantly. Looking at the median values here, most companies are getting tiny loans, and probably from what I hear from bankers, using consumer credit rather than commercial credit, which is, as I understand, available mainly for companies with about over 2 million euros in revenue per year. So that locks out a significant number of businesses. It's something that is a global phenomenon. Actually, it's called the missing middle, that if you're not getting microfinance and you're not big enough to get bank finance, you're really locked out of the financing markets overall. Again, few banks are focusing on small businesses. The regulators have not let most non-bank financial institutions in this market that you normally see in markets like Serbia. There's certainly fault on the business side as well. I mean, there aren't a lot of bankable businesses, and any bankers in here will tell you that. They don't see a lot of, quality small businesses coming in that that are bankable. Why is that? One reason is lack of sophisticated financial management, and you can see that from here. Not only are they not doing really one of the most basic aspects of financial management, which is accounts receivable management, they don't even see any need to do that or have any desire to do that. So that's an indicator, I think, of a lack of sophistication. Now, another possibility might be selling part of the company to raise capital for investment. That's done a lot, more so in the United States than in the European Union, but it's also a big market there for companies to bring in capital, bring in a minority investor. Very little knowledge of that, and for those who know about that as an option, they are not interested. And it's a lack of familiarity. It's also a lack of trust. So there's hopefully some education can be done and other things to build trust that this actually makes sense. I think there's not a lot of companies, obviously, that understand what this entails, that they're not going to lose the business. Actually, they'll bring in potentially an investor that can help them not only financially, but with management and access to markets. Maybe fintech options would be a good option for companies here in Serbia. We had a conference on fintech in, when was it? I wasn't here. It was June, and learned a lot about some really exciting trends going on around the world, including in markets similar to Serbia, for some products to come in, both bank and non-bank, completely outside the financial system. Some of them, others, banks are using a lot of fintech to increase their ability to make loans to a more diverse group of businesses and citizens. Not being used much here, and in fact there's little knowledge of it, and again a lack of trust here. So education is important, as well as actually bringing some of these things into the market. But you can bring them in. I'm not sure how much they're going to be used given the business's attitudes here. So confidence building is important. I'm going to conclude with a few things that I mentioned about the growing firms, which firms are driving growth here, and this needs a lot more work, and even our own data we haven't fully analyzed yet, but we've done, I think, a good job of starting to target what attributes these firms have. And that's important because that'll drive policy making. If the goal is to drive economic growth and job creation, these seem to be the exact firms that we want to be thinking about and making sure that they can grow. So this is, I'll try to explain this, but it's also in your handout that you have with a better explanation than I can give. But we identified 22 bits of data that we had from the survey that we feel are indicators of some degree of sophistication in the firm's business model. And they're charted against revenue growth on the left side. And over the period 2015 to 2017, the last available data that we had for the firms that were surveyed. And on the bubble color is types of sophistication, and then the size of the bubble is based on the share of firms. So the larger the bubble, the more firms are in that category. And So we can see from this that, that firms that, in general, that meet the sophistication criteria are above the line of average growth in revenues. So it more or less met our expectations there. And there are a few things that are the most important, although if you look at the size of the bubbles, you could argue about which are the most important. But certainly anything above the line is something to really pay attention to, I think. And so we look at what's the most important indicators. Exporting, particularly outside the former Yugoslavia or the non-EU former Yugoslavia. Having a web shop and digital marketing, also most important. And then if we look down here on this one, being part of, this is an odd one that we can't figure out why this is, but being part of a business association is, means that you'll have less growth, but that doesn't include the Chamber of Commerce, I'm happy to say, Chamber friends. It's other associations. We're not sure why there may or may not be a correlation there. Again, I want to focus on what seems to be two important indicators for revenue growth. That's whether a firm exports, and particularly whether a firm has a web shop. Probably the latter is a good indicator of sophistication and probably ability to invest, because they've had to put the money in to have the web shop. But we can see that again, this shows that firms that have a more sophisticated technological abilities, more sophisticated management, tend to export more. Now, there's an element that was identified in a paper that I see Kori Udovicki here, that she did at the end of last year, that looks at the sophistication of their product development and services. And I hope I don't mischaracterize this, but there are a lot of really good firms out there in Serbia that have engineering capabilities and other technical capabilities that are really good to provide some specialized services. They're very widely dispersed. The food industry has got some very good firms that are more sophisticated in their operations side. So probably some more work is needed to be done to identify what their characteristics are. What we've been able to do here is more on the management and financial management side to identify the characteristics of these firms. So it does, again, look like the more sophisticated, globally competitive firms, and this is no surprise to anybody, are the ones that are going to create growth in Serbia and create jobs. So policy, at least to some extent, should be oriented to having more of them and supporting those that are in that category. So how does the government do some of these things? That's something we all need to discuss. But certainly one element is getting out of the way. By that I mean smart regulation that protects markets, protects citizens, but is streamlined and efficient enough to not hinder the operations of the businesses. Also the government can do things like supporting innovations and technological development. There's some legislation that's could be of help there, but particularly linking with academia, where you can get some technological innovation coming from faculties and bringing them into businesses better. That's, I'm not sure how much that's done here in Serbia. Certainly in the United States, that's huge. That's one of the ways Silicon Valley grew around Stanford University. So that's something to think about from a policy standpoint. Education in general, investments in information technology and communications, and probably some rethinking about how the financial support is being done by the government for small businesses, what types of small businesses, what sizes of small businesses, what characteristics, and that probably goes for the donor programs as well. So again, we have a lot more data. I only showed you a bit of it. We're happy to share it with anybody, any of your groups, your associations, your ministry. We're happy to come over and give you a customized presentation on the most interesting aspects to you. I think it's It's extremely valuable, especially now that we've got these trends, and I hope you'll all take advantage of it. So thank you, and now I'm happy to introduce my colleague again, Dragana Stanojevic, and Dragana will lead a panel conversation about the results. Is this for you?
Hvala, Joe.